Welcome to Part 2 of the Air Traffic Organization ATO Safety Management System SMS and Safety Risk Management SRM Safety Stakeholders Briefing. All stakeholders have a responsibility to support and strengthen the existing safety culture. Without a robust safety culture, the SMS is unsustainable. Part 1 provided a high-level overview of the structure and requirements of the ATO SMS and introduced how the ATO coordinates with stakeholders to execute the SRM component of the SMS. Part 2 provides more insight into the SRM process, why the SMS matters, and how safety stakeholders can support the ATO safety culture by building trust and rapport amongst industry and agency peers alike. The purpose of this briefing is to inform stakeholders about the benefits of the ATO SMS and the goals of the ATO SRM process. At the end of Part 2, stakeholders will be able to recognize when the ATO SRM process is required and how safety decisions affect operations, and participate effectively in SRM panels with an understanding of how the ATO identifies and addresses safety risk within the National Airspace System, NAS. Review the references for this briefing. As Part 1 of this briefing discussed, the ATO SMS is a roadmap to ensuring system safety in the NAS. The ultimate goal of the ATO SMS is to maintain an acceptable level of risk within the ATO's provisioning of air traffic management and communication, navigation, and surveillance services. SRM informs decision-makers about potential hazards, risks, and the means to reduce risk associated with a particular NAS change or existing safety issue. This methodology applies to NAS equipment, operations, and procedures. It facilitates communication and coordination across FAA organizations for enhanced safety risk decision-making. The SRM process is formally initiated by NAS changes and existing safety issues. A NAS change is a modification to any element of the NAS that pertains to or may affect provisioning of the following services: air traffic management, communication, navigation, and surveillance. Existing safety issues are existing causes, contributing factors, or findings that led to or may lead to an unsafe outcome. It is important to note that the SRM process is not used to approve a change to the NAS. Rather, the SRM process serves to simply inform decision-makers about the potential hazards, risks, and means to reduce the risk associated with that change. Some examples of NAS changes that are likely to require SRM include operational and procedural changes or waivers that are not defined in an existing order, any waiver or change to an order if the order implements a procedure that, when followed, could affect the provision of air traffic services, changes to system certification and maintenance standards, requirements, and practices, for example, technical handbooks. Before NAS equipment, procedures, systems, or services are removed, discontinued, deactivated, or decommissioned from the NAS. Airspace changes, including routes, airways, sectors, and the addition or deletion of a position or sector. Changes to policies, procedures, or NAS equipment for which training exists. The SMS manual provides additional information and examples. NAS changes that are unlikely to require SRM include facility layout, redline, or end state drawings, for example, air route surveillance radar, air traffic control tower, terminal radar approach control facility, air route traffic control center, as identified in the Configuration Control Board Charter Appendix A. system support directives that do not change requirements and have followed Acquisition Management System (AMS) development assurance processes, changes to directives for those directives with no safety functionality, installation or moving of equipment if defined installation siting processes are not violated, maintenance actions as specified in maintenance technical handbooks. Note: if there is ever a doubt whether SRM is required for a change or you require assistance, contact the Safety and Technical Training Safety Engineering Team Manager, AJI 314, at 9-AJI-SMS@FAA.gov. There are several situations where SRM is not applied properly in the NAS today. For example, it's not correct to perform SRM before a change is finalized or use SRM to determine whether a change is valid. Also, SRM should not be used solely to comply with safety policy. For those unfamiliar with the process, it can seem difficult or confusing. These concerns lead people to ask, what's the point? In response to this, the answer is, you are already doing SRM. For example, imagine an air traffic manager is planning to change a procedure at his or her facility. One of the first things they will do is gather a group of technical experts to discuss possible implications of the change. This is the beginning of the SRM process. If this group determines that the change impacts the NAS, the process is formally initiated. The SRM process builds upon the initial efforts and ensures that the change is communicated and assessed by all stakeholders. The Dyad is a 5-step process carried forth via an SRM panel of affected stakeholders. The goal of SRM is to address safety risk in an unbiased and objective manner. The Dyad process consists of the following phases. The Describe the System phase defines the scope of the effort and identifies affected stakeholders in coordination with the change proponent. The Identify Hazards phase uses a structured approach to identify hazards associated with a particular NAS change or existing safety issue. The Analyze Risk phase uses a data-driven approach to evaluate the severity and likelihood of a hazard's effects. The Assess Risk phase uses the ATO risk matrix to assign a risk level to each hazard. The Treat Risk phase identifies mitigations, sets safety performance targets used to verify the effectiveness of the mitigations, and develops a monitoring plan. Each SRM panel attendee will fulfill one of the 5 roles, as outlined in ATO SMS policy. Change proponent: an individual, program office, facility, or organization with the FAA that has identified the need for SRM or has proposed or is sponsoring a NAS change or means to address an existing safety issue. Facilitator, co-facilitator: a trained expert on the SRM process who moderates the deliberations of the SRM panel participants from a neutral position. Communication, coordination, and preparation between the change proponent and facilitator or co-facilitator is important for the success of the SRM panel. Panel member: an FAA employee or other representative, as specified in an FAA Memorandum of Agreement, who objectively performs the SRM process. Note: this is inclusive of Federal Contract Tower employees or other contractors who have been given explicit authority to represent, that is, make decisions for, speak on behalf of, the FAA. This includes FAA bargaining unit representatives or Department of Defense (DoD) representatives. DoD participates as a panel member when DoD air traffic control procedures and/or airspace are impacted. Subject matter expert: an FAA employee or third-party stakeholder who serves as a technical expert on the NAS change, procedure, hardware, software, or proposed solution undergoing SRM. Panel observer, an individual who is not part of the SRM panel meeting and does not participate in the deliberation process. He or she only observes the proceedings for informational purposes. An SRM panel is convened to analyze and assess potential safety risks associated with a NAS change or existing safety issue. When necessary, they also identify a means to reduce that risk and develop a plan to measure the effectiveness of the risk management strategy utilized. The composition and size of an ATO SRM panel and the duration of the meeting is dependent upon the type and complexity of the NAS change or existing safety issue. During the SRM panel, participants conduct a data analysis and share subject matter expertise to identify hazards. Based upon the analysis of the data and input from subject matter experts, SMEs, the panel discusses proposed means to reduce the determined risk level and how those mitigations will ultimately address that risk. Finally, the panel decides how to best monitor the operation with the mitigations in place and determine the appropriate performance target to use for monitoring. Panel participants are expected to review collected data pertaining to the NAS change or existing safety issue, analyze available data and input from panel members and SMEs to identify hazards, assess any associated risk using the ATO SRM risk matrix, propose potential mitigations and determine predicted residual risk, develop safety performance targets to determine effectiveness of risk treatment, and identify organizations to accept and monitor risk. To be an effective participant of the SRM panel, safety stakeholders are expected to review all pre-SRM panel briefing materials received from the change proponent or panel facilitator and come prepared with questions. Become familiar with any safety data presented regarding severity and likelihood of identified effects. Understand the SRM process goals so that participation in the panel is met with an unbiased frame of mind to discuss and prioritize safety. Contact the change proponent or panel facilitator if something has been omitted from the pre-panel materials. For example, additional data pertinent to the analysis or assessment or stakeholders omitted from the invitation. To ensure effective participation in an SRM panel, safety stakeholders are expected to understand and speak on behalf of your organization with regard to the change or issue undergoing SRM and the feasibility of identified safety requirements. Understand that a negative attitude towards the process or the change or issue undergoing SRM is counterproductive. Communicate respectfully, even at points of contention during SRM panel proceedings. Socialize critical recommendations and decisions to management. For example, if the organization is assigned a safety requirement, you will be expected to discuss with management before management is asked to approve. This is intended to minimize scenarios where safety requirements are unattainable and the panel must reconvene to address a rejected requirement, and provide a timely review of the Srm document after the Srm panel proceedings. Your goal is to participate in the SRM panel with an understanding of the SRM process and how the ATO determines risk. When participating in an SRM panel, some common obstacles are highly political, contentious, or complex subject matter, pressure that may derive from diverse group dynamics, improper scoping of the SRM panel, identification of initial or existing high-risk hazards requiring additional coordination with the ATO Chief Operating Officer, COO, and Air Traffic Safety Oversight Service, AOV, rejection of safety requirements from implementing organizations. The representative is expected to socialize the safety requirement to their leadership so that they are well versed on the possible commitment. cross-line of business LOB changes or issues requiring coordination from a large number of internal and safety stakeholders. Inappropriate, inadequate, or absent representation at SRM panels. A large SRM panel resulting in a longer document review and comment adjudication period. Although common obstacles cannot always be avoided, there are some strategies that may help mitigate ineffective participation outcomes. Be respectful and courteous. Make ethical choices. Verify that safety requirements are practical and viable, and communicate safety requirements to managers. The SRM document is a record of the SRM panel determinations that support whether the NAS change and/or risk management strategies should be accepted by ATO or FAA management officials from a safety risk perspective. There are two types of SRM documents: SRM documents with hazards and SRM documents without hazards. During the SRM document review period, all panel members and SMEs should feel compelled to share their input on the information that is included in the SRM document. The review period is meant to ensure that the SRM document accurately reflects the SRM panel's proceedings. Note: panel observers do not actively participate in the deliberation process, but rather seek to observe and better understand the SRM process. They do not provide comments on SRM documents. Effective comments are those that correct inaccuracies, identify discrepancies with ATO SMS policy, deliver the opinions of the panel participants' organization, and offer the participants' individual expertise. In conclusion, as a safety stakeholder, you can help support and maintain a robust safety culture by understanding the ATO SMS and actively participating in the SRM process. When you support the ATO SMS, you help build trust and rapport among industry and agency peers. By effectively and strategically applying your knowledge of the ATO SMS and SRM, we can all work together to ensure that the FAA achieves its mission of providing the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. The ATO strives for continuous improvement of our SMS through communication and coordination with all our safety stakeholders. For questions regarding SMS policy application or recommendations for changes to SMS policy, please contact 9-AJI-SMS@faa.gov.